Welcome to Point-and-Click Purgatory, the show where I look at point-and-click adventure games and judge whether they are worthy of being immortalized in heaven or deserve to be cast down into the fiery depths of hell. We're taking a walk on the wild side today with a game by a Finnish developer, Housemarque. The company was founded in 1995 by the merging of pre-existing companies Bloodhouse and Terramarque, hence their names similarly merging together like some monstrous Mr. Sparkle amalgam. Bloodhouse had made waves in the early 90s with Stardust, a well-polished asteroids-like for the Amiga platform, and its sequel Super Stardust. Surprisingly, the company still exists and is known nowadays for games like Dead Nation, Resogun, and of course Super Stardust HD. But today's subject is from 1996, when Housemarque tried their hand at the point-and-click adventure game genre with a little-known title called Alien Incident. I originally happened to stumble upon the game on a Twilight disc back in the day, and being the adventure game enthusiast that I was, and still am, I immediately found my interest piqued. Oh, for those of you who don't know, Twilight was a series of bootleg CD-ROMs commonly found in the Netherlands during the late 90s, which contained pirated games and applications, and were popular among aspiring pirates like myself, not yet equipped with broadband internet or CD burners back in the day. Not to mention them being a great source for obscure games as well, and in no way related to a certain infamous novel/movie franchise. But regarding Alien Incident, was it a hidden gem unfairly ignored at the time, or does it remain forgotten for a good reason? Let the judgment begin. The game's rather ominous intro sets the stage as we step into the 90s-tastic skin of Benjamin, a kid living in the mansion of his eccentric inventor uncle Alberto Einstein. I'll just let that name sink in because I'm not saying it again. Our story begins on Halloween night when Ben's uncle stands ready to test his latest invention, a wormhole spawner that can create interdimensional pathways through space. I see Uncle Dearest goes by the Professor Palya's philosophy of if you can invent it, then why the hell not? Before anyone with a working knowledge of sci-fi can point out to the old guy what a horrendously bad idea this is, lightning strikes the device and creates a wormhole over planet Earth, out of which emerges a glowing manta-like entity chased by an alien spacecraft. The aliens, who all look like little rotund Caspers and are bossed around by their boss, named Boss, are understandably confused about their new whereabouts, and the boss is especially ticked off that they lost the entity, but he's ready and willing to tear apart the Earth if it means finding his prize. Not long after, the aliens come kidnap Ben's uncle in the hopes that he can send them back, while Ben himself, watching in horror, manages to avoid capture. So now it's up to our lovable teenage hero to save his uncle, along with the mysterious entity, and of course the planet. Alien Incident's plot is simple but nonetheless competently executed, with tongue firmly in cheek. It's not hard to see how Housemarque took more than a little inspiration from LucasArts in terms of the story and overall lighthearted tone. The big old mansion inhabited by a mad scientist are obvious nods to Maniac Mansion, and there's plenty of humorous cutscenes to showcase what's happening with the aliens while you're wandering about, very much in line with Dave the Tentacle's meanwhile bits. The antics in the cutscenes are quite entertaining, with the hilariously incompetent alien Caspers constantly finding themselves on the receiving end of their boss's fury, and Ben engages in some rather slapsticky cartoony antics himself at times. While Ben is on his own for most of the adventure, he does encounter several amusing characters here and there, like an overly paranoid hippie, an extremely eager antique shop owner who somewhat reminds me of Monkey Island Stan, and Yodel, a strange old man who seems to know a lot about what's going on. And in case you were wondering, yes, his name is a nod to Yoda. In fact, if there's one thing the people at Housemarque like to homage more than LucasArts games, it's Star Wars, with a fair bit of dialogue lifted pretty much verbatim, almost to the point where you could make a drinking game out of it. The dialogues do feel a bit awkward at times, along with containing the occasional spelling error, but hey, Finnish developer and all that. I do like how Benjamin has a lot to say about the stuff he can examine, often giving little hints of backstory of him and his uncle, or just reflecting on some bizarre inventions like the high-definition LCD mirror, startlingly realistic 3D television, or the floppy toaster, which are both funny and insightful. Sadly, there's not really any depth to the story overall, as it's mostly just a romp through Ben's uncle's house and the surrounding environments before making your way onto the alien ship for the climax. Still, the game as a whole feels adventurous all the same, and that pretty much is the mission statement of the point-and-click adventure game genre, is it not? The ending, however, feels a bit flimsy as the alien threat gets resolved rather quickly without any input from the player, and everyone lives happily ever after. Yeah, spoiler alert, as if you didn't see that one coming. So it kind of feels like the developers ran out of time and ideas and had to hastily wrap things up. In the end, the lack of story is disappointing, and while the dialogue isn't the best I've seen, the overall sense of humor is nevertheless strong enough to carry the game. Plot gets a generous thumbs up. Let's talk gameplay. In terms of the interface, the game is about as minimal as you can get. Inventory at the bottom, status bar above it, left click to walk, right click to interact. That's it. The real meat of the game thus lies in exploration and inventory puzzles. The first part of the game is spent going around the house and trying to escape, as the front entrance is guarded by a pair of dim-witted but nonetheless dangerous alien mooks. The overall puzzles are easy enough to figure out, as they generally involve using your inventory items where they're most needed and are mostly moon logic free. Unlock a door here, put a dab of miracle plant potion there, or smash a window with a hammer, just cuz. It's quite fun how you gradually unlock more parts of the mansion before you finally manage to escape. Almost like a 2D Resident Evil without zombies, jump scares, or any ways to die or get stuck for that matter. So not really like Resident Evil at all, I guess. You do build up a rather impressive collection of inventory items pretty quickly, so it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes trying to figure out what goes where, especially with how you collect about a half dozen different keys over the course of the game, but you will nevertheless find a use for everything you have sooner or later. Just be sure to closely examine anything you pick up, as certain items can also be disassembled or otherwise manipulated in some way. Given the rather obvious nature of the inventory puzzles that make up the gameplay, the game is rather on the easy side, but it's nevertheless good to see the developers took the effort to keep things tight and logical, especially for a first-timer in this genre. Unfortunately, a big problem you're confronted with right off the bat is a classic case of that old point-and-click adventure game malady, pixel hunting. Items are generally small and tend to blend right into the background, especially with how dark a lot of the locations tend to be both inside and outside, so that can lead to a lot of backtracking to find anything you may have missed. Plus, the status bar tends to lock when Ben is set on doing something already, and thus you can easily miss important stuff that you might mouse over while he's otherwise preoccupied. When you do finally get out of the house though, you're free to explore the outside areas, and it's a joy to see all the different locations and gradually piece together what needs to be done. The overall amount of locations is rather small, but this fortunately means backtracking isn't nearly as painful as it otherwise might have been. That said, it's not always as obvious where exits might be, because again, you can sometimes barely see where you're going, so for the longest time, I had no idea there was anything to the west of the mansion after I first got out, and only later discovered a house and adjoining antique store there. And then later still, after making your way into an underground system of caves, there's a maze. Yep, blatant padding in an already short game, and while annoying, it fortunately isn't that hard, even with identical corridors, a lot of dead ends, and an obligatory hidden inventory item. Somewhat more baffling and also blatant padding happens shortly after arriving on the spaceship, where after some initial exploring, you find you need a security card to use an elevator. After backtracking to the transporter room where you started, you now find a sleepy alien formerly slumped over the console, now lying on the floor, revealing the relevant card. And it's also here on the spaceship that I ran into an annoying little bug where entering a certain room will sometimes cause the sound to glitch out, which can only be fixed by exiting out of the game. Despite my gripes, however, the puzzles were solid enough, and I had a lot of fun with the game overall, but the lack of challenge and real effort to stand out from the norm, plus some glaring lack of polish, means that gameplay-wise, Alien Incident gets a sideways thumb. And now I get to talk about my favorite part of this game, the presentation. As you can plainly see, Alien Incident looks absolutely stunning. All of the different locations are incredibly atmospheric thanks to the moody lighting and animation, not to mention gorgeously detailed in all of their pixelated glory. Ben himself has one of the smoothest walk cycles I've ever seen in a game like this, and he's got a good variety of little animations for even the most basic actions, which makes it quite entertaining to watch him do his thing. Even something as simple as him climbing this rope way back in the background looks pretty damn impressive, though it kind of feels like the animators put all of their efforts in Ben, considering the other characters don't entirely match up, but they're still good looking in their own right either way. There are some noticeable instances of early 90s CGI, but it's not too distracting and actually has some charm of its own, I feel. Less charming, however, is when you finally get onto the alien spaceship and see all of the backgrounds are nice CGI as well, which are far less appealing and detailed, not to mention dither to hell and back. But what does add a lot to the game's atmosphere as well is the awesome mod music. For those of you who don't know, mod is basically MIDI, but instead of predefined instruments, it can use any audio sample as an instrument, and was a common format on the Amiga platform and popular among the European demo scene. Each location has its own distinct theme, and just walking from room to room, the game gracefully transitions between different songs. Not quite on the level of LucasArts' iMuse, but it still adds a lot to the experience overall. The music itself is surprisingly eerie and foreboding considering the game's lighthearted tone, but combined with the moody environment, it certainly gives it a unique feel overall. Better still, the music can easily be found in its original SVM format in the game's files, so you can load it up in your favorite player for casual listening whenever you want. But now is also when I have to address one of the game's greatest shortcomings: the voice acting, or rather the complete lack thereof. Now, the original European release of this game claimed to have character speech on the back of the box, and technically it's not wrong considering the intro is fully voiced.
Now look here, Ben. This is a historical moment. I will now attempt to activate my latest invention, the Wormhole Spawner. Okay, I'm so thrilled about all this, there's no telling what will happen when I pull this switch here.
The acting heard within definitely isn't terrible, and appropriately goofy if nothing else.
There doesn't seem to be anybody there.
Maybe the doorbell doesn't work. We should get back to the ship. The door's open, you fools! Let's go!
But after that, for whatever reason, the entire rest of the game has written dialogue only, which is rather baffling to me. Especially glaring is that on starting up, the game asks you whether to turn on subtitles or not, which seemingly has no effect on the actual game, until you get to the ending cutscene, which will be completely mute and incomprehensible if you chose to turn subtitles off. I'm guessing there may have been plans at some point to have the game be fully voiced, but time and or money was running out, and so the game was kind of left at this awkward compromise. Shortcomings aside, however, Alien Incident is still gorgeous to see and hear in action, and the foreboding atmosphere adds a lot to the adventurous experience overall. A well-deserved thumbs up for presentation. Final assessment time. For a first-time effort, Alien Incident is amazingly solid with its striking presentation. Itself not really surprising considering Housemarque's pedigree, but more so thanks to the tight puzzle design and enjoyably goofy sense of humor. The jarring lack of voice acting and some of the aforementioned shortcomings in gameplay do mar the overall experience somewhat, but they're excusable in the grand scheme of things. Alien Incident certainly show that Housemarque had the right stuff for adventure gaming, so it's a shame that their only effort in that field would end up being so overlooked. Either way, this game gets my final rating of heavenly, and I heartily recommend you go out and rediscover this little diamond in the rough if you haven't played it already. This has been Amayirot Akago, keep being awesome, and remember, look, a blueberry!